Hey everybody, we're back in the shop today, and we're going to get going on that rear end axle assembly today. And there's a lot to talk about, so we're going to jump right in it. First piece we're going to get in that housing is the pinion. And I just pressed this bearing off. That's that bearing right there. And here's the cup you'd put in the housing. There's the original shims that came out. That's your first critical dimension. This goes under the cup in the housing, and that sets the depth of your pinion in and out. Now you can see on this pinion, I think you can see it. And it's going to be hard to see, you can't see it, but it's got a +2 on it. So when your pinion is marked like that, the +2 means this pinion is 2/1000ths larger, and it's going to stick 2/1000ths larger into the case. So you would deduct 2/1000ths from your shim pack. You wouldn't add, you'd deduct. The plus means that the pinion's larger. Where the pinion isn't larger, but the way the housing was machined, basically, that's going to set that pinion 2/1000ths deeper into the case, you know, toward the ring gear. So just be aware of that. And that's your first critical set of shims, is going to be your pinion depth. The next set goes right here under your outer bearing, and this is what sets the rotational torque. That's what sets the squeeze on these bearings, how tight they're squeezed into the cup there, your bottom and your top here. So we'll check the rotational torque, we'll measure these up, and we'll check the rotational torque. Those are your two first critical steps that you have to get right when you're putting your pinion in. So we've got, these got banged up coming out, but we've got a 25,000 shim pack here. And when you measure your shims, don't just stick them together and measure them. Get a good measuring device, measure each shim individually. Like that's a 10/1000ths. And we got another 10. And we got a 5. So we're 25. Don't just stick those together and throw the mic on it and measure them. Measure them individually and add them up. Now we got a original shim pack with the parts for this. So I pulled out a 25/1000ths shim pack. We're going to put that in. We're going to find our new cup. Those go right under the cup. We're going to bang that cup in the housing, and that's going to set the depth of our pinion there. And we know that's going to be right because we took these out and the gears are perfect, so we know that's right. If this was delivered to me taken apart and shims missing, like sometimes they always are, there's another way to figure out the pinion depth, and I'll show you that next. Okay, a very long time ago I was lucky enough to get an original Willys pinion depth setting kit. I think you can see the instructions are still there. Again, this is another thing made by Miller Manufacturing, like some of the other tools you've seen me use. And this has everything in it to set the pinion depth. And like I say, a lot of times guys will take these things apart and they'll just throw them in a box. They'll lose the shims on me, and then they'll bring them in and they'll think, you know, it just takes a minute to put them together. But when that happens and I don't know what the shim pack is, instead of guessing and trying to put it in and take it out and check the tooth pattern and this and that and the other thing, this is an original kit, and some of the service manuals, you can see how that's used. Very handy tool for when they come in a basket case condition. But we don't need that today, but I do have it for those instances when I do need it. I took this one apart carefully. I know where the shims go. I know what the shim pack is, so we can work from there. Again, very handy to have if you don't know what the pinion depth is. But let's move over to the case. We'll get those shims in, we'll get the bearing cup knocked in, and we'll continue on with the rebuild. Okay, there's our shim pack. There's our new cup. And here's our install tool for that cup. It just fits right in there and allows us to knock that in without damaging the cup in any way. So we're going to go over and we'll get an extension handle and we'll knock this cup in the case. Okay, so you can see our housing bore there. There's a 25,000 shim pack. We're going to seat that in there. Then our cup goes in, our install tool, and basically that just gets knocked in there. I can't really show you that, I'll be in the way of the camera, but we're just going to get the handle that goes in that hole there, and we're going to seat that in. You want to make sure you seat that down till it's good and tight. You'll feel it rebound back when you hit it with the hammer, and you know you're sitting down perfect. You want to make sure that's tight, your shims are snug in there, everything's set down perfectly tight to the housing, and you won't have any troubles down the road with that settling in there. So make sure that's in good and secure. Okay, we're going to knock that in now. Okay, I think you can see we've got our cup knocked in there. The shims are underneath it. It's nice and tight to the housing. And now we're going to press the bearing onto the pinion itself, and then we can set it down in there and turn this up 90 degrees and put the shims in on the outer bearing and get the rotational torque set. We know we got our pinion depth right because we're just changing bearings here. We didn't have a failure or anything, so we're going to go back with the exact same shims that came out. If you've had a failure or backlash is off or something like that, you want to reset your pinion depth. But we know this one's right, so that's all set now, and we'll go work on pressing the pinion bearing now. Okay, here's our new bearing we're going to press on, and I just want to show you our pinion here. This is a Salisbury gear. This ring and pinion was made by Salisbury, and usually by 3As that were made by Spicer. It's a Spicer style rear, but Salisbury was still making some gears. And if you're working on a 2A or something earlier than this 3A like this, what they did on the earlier ones, like the model 41-2 on a 2A, is this section here that's all one piece. This was a tube that slid over the housing here on some of the earlier Salisbury gears. So if you get one that has the removable tube here, don't be alarmed. That's how the early ones were. And like I say, normally on a 3A, by 51, it should have been a Spicer in there, but this is an early rear end here, so it's still got the Salisbury gears in it. No big deal. It's a fine gear, not a problem. It's not a junk gear or anything. And what we're going to do now is we're going to press this bearing, and we're going to get it nice and tight up against the pinion there, and we'll come back and we'll set it in the case. Okay, there's our bearing on there, and like I say, the next thing we need to do is figure out this shim pack that's going to set our rotational torque on those bearings. So we're ready to set this in the case now. We've got to knock the cup in for the outer bearing, so we're going to do that now. Then we're going to set it. We're going to measure our shim pack. We're going to try it. We're going to check the rotational torque and see if we need to take the pinion in and out and try and hit the rotational torque just right. So let me knock that cup in, and we'll be back, and we'll set the pinion in the case. Okay guys, I'm going to try and show you what I'm doing here. Here's our pinion. We have the original 55 thousandths shim pack on there. and then our bearing is going to go on from the front like that. So we're just going to stick this in the case. And we're going to get our bearing started on there. Okay. I'm going to have to tap that in a little bit, and then I'm going to get the yoke and put it on there, and then we'll tighten that down. We're not going to use any seal right now, and we're not going to put any of the oil slinger or anything like that in there. We're just checking rotational torque right now. So let me go grab the yoke, and we'll see what we got there for torque. Okay, we've got our pinion in there, and I've tapped it down with a punch. Just tap it down easy, you know, hold back on your pinion. Just, it's not real tight, just tap it down easy so you get no up down play, but you still have, so it still rotates, and that's a good starting point to put your yoke on. That way you're not trying to push that bearing down just with your threads here. So we've got it set for depth real good. Now we're going after the squeeze on the bearings. And we're going to measure the torque on that while we're turning it. So no oil seal, no oil slinger, nothing like that. We're going to send the yoke on there, we're going to tighten it, we're going to lock it down around 100 foot-pounds, and then we'll measure and see where we're at. This part here you want to get right. If you have to take it in and out, you know, 10 times, do it. Get that rotational torque right. That's going to give you a long life. Your gears are going to last forever. You don't want that moving back and forth, and you don't want it too tight where you're going to burn up your bearings. This has to be right, and like I say, if you have to knock that pinion out 10 different times to do it, get it right. Spend the time right now and get this right, and you won't have to worry about it for another 60 years. So that's what we're going to do next. Let me get the yoke out and the wrench and the nut and stuff, and we'll get that on. Okay, we've got our yoke on, it's torqued down, and we've got a rotational torque wrench here, and this feels a little tight already, but let's check it. Okay, I'm showing about 40 inch-pounds of rotational torque, and that's way too much. We want about 15. So this has got to come apart, and we got to get another shim in there. And again, like I say, you want to get this right. So I'm going to pull this apart, maybe put another maybe 5 thousandths in there, and we'll check it again and see where we wind up. Okay guys, I'm going to give you a couple tips, because a lot of times this has got to come in and out a bunch, and a lot of times your yoke can be a pain to get on and off. What I did with this one was machine the splines out of it, and it goes on and off real easy. Basically we just want to squeeze it, you know, so we don't really need the splines right now. It helps to hold it, but when you're tightening it, if you reach under there and grab the pinion, you could get the nut to 100 foot-pounds without any trouble, and that comes off real easy. Now, because we tapped that bearing down and it's seated, that could be a pain to come out. And the easiest way I know of to get them out is just take your rivet gun or your air chisel and get a round nose bit right in there, bang it right out. It'll come flying right out of there for you. Just make sure you catch it underneath. And like I say, because this may have to come in and out a couple times, you want to make it as easy on you as possible. Let me see if I can get set up and show you how that comes out. Okay, just a couple hits and it flies right out of there for you. So now we're going to add another 5 to our shim pack here, and we're going to put it in. We'll do the whole thing all over again. Okay, everybody, this is about the 4th time we're putting this back in again. We're checking the rotational torque one more time. And we're just going to put that on there. It feels like we got it pretty good this time. I like the way that feels. And it's hard to see that with the glare, but we're just about 18 inch-pounds, and I'm shooting anywhere from 12 to 20 inch-pounds on this 44 here. So I like where it is there. We're going to take it apart and we're going to finish up the pinion installation. We're going to put the oil slinger in there, put the regular yoke on, put the oil seal, gasket, stuff like that, and we're going to finish up getting that pinion in there. And like I say, I made 4 adjustments. I started out at 55 thousandths shim pack, and I wound up at 81 thousandths to get the rotational torque right. It squeezed it where I couldn't turn it with the 55 in there. And so, like I say, I made 8,000 jumps, you know, 8 thousandths, 8 thousandths. And then I completely disassembled the shim pack and put together an 81 thousandths shim pack, and we hit it right on the money there, and that's where we're staying. So that sets the depth and the rotational torque, and now we just got to get the carrier figured out, and we'll do that next. Okay, here's the sequence of how this goes together. You've got your oil slinger. That goes in. Here's when you get your pinion seal. You're going to have a gasket in there. Make sure that recess is clean in there. That goes against there. And your seal goes in just like this. I'm going to take a little grease and put it in here so when it's running on the yoke, it doesn't tear it up at all. So put a little grease on that, we'll tap that in, and we'll get the yoke on. Okay, when you put your seal in there, you can't just tap it flush with that. You want to make sure it's sitting on the gasket you put in there. So you could take a piece of anything that diameter, tap it down in there. This is just an old part of a tool from something that fits in there perfectly. And you just tap it down. It should be just a little bit below flush there. And you can feel it when it's solid and it's hitting your gasket. That makes sure that no oil is going to creep by your slinger, get up in there, and then start walking out the threads there. So make sure you tap that down far enough. There was a special tool available in the service manual, you can see it. But anything that fits that outer diameter and fits inside the housing, just tap that down real tight. You won't have any leaks. Okay, we've got a new lock nut here. I always use a new lock nut on these. Washer's fine. And we've got some grease in there. So we're going to put our yoke on now. And sometimes you have to tap those on. They can be a little bit of a bear. But we'll tap this one down. We'll get that tapped down, then we'll put the nut and the washer on. Okay, we're going to take this down to final torque. And you guys remember seeing this tool before when we took it apart. It's just a good way to hold the yoke now without damaging, you know, a big pipe wrench would damage that yoke, so we use this tool. Okay, that's 100 foot-pounds. And turns a little stiffer now because we got the seal in there, but we know it's right on the money because we tested it without the seal. So that should work out fine. You get this off here. Okay, that's perfect. That's turning just perfect. So that's how you get your pinion set. The depth and the proper preload on the bearings. So we'll flip this back down again and we'll go over to the bench and we will replace the bearings on the carrier, and I'll show you how we do that next. Okay, we're going to work on the carrier now. Basically we got to replace the bearings on each side. The cups had a lot of digs in them, and a lot of areas you could catch with your fingernail, and we don't want to give this rear end a bad start out, so we're changing all the bearings. And to get these off can be a bear sometimes. There's a little cutout in the carrier right there and one on the opposite side, and you've got to get a puller on there and get these pulled off. So first thing we need to do is put a center in where the axle goes. And when you buy a carrier kit, a carrier bearing puller kit, you get a whole assortment of these guys, hardened steel, from real tiny ones to very big ones, and they fit all different size carriers. And then we've got a puller here, and this puller has a crossbar in it so you could tighten up the jaws there, and that's kind of critical because when you put pressure on these, they always want to come flying out. So you find your little cutouts in your carrier, which would be there and there. Center that up, and we'll tighten those down. We'll get those a little tighter. Then we'll start putting pressure on that, and that's going to just lift the bearing right off there. Sometimes they come easy. Sometimes I put the impact gun to them just to get them off there, because a lot of times after being on for so long they can be real sticky on there. But we'll see how this one goes, and we'll get set up and start pulling the bearings. Okay, those bearings are really stuck on there. I'm going to go after it with the impact gun, and I think that should be enough to hold those closed. Sometimes I have to wrap a chain wrench around there too because they want to spread. Just depends how tight they are on there, and let's see what happens here. Okay, looks like it's coming. Okay, there we got it. A little bit easier with the impact gun. So our shims are critical there. We want to keep those where they go. Get this loosened up. Okay. There's our shim pack. And these are very specific side to side. So we're going to pull a bearing, clean this up, measure our shim pack, record it so we know where we are in case we have any trouble. And we'll put the bearing on, and then we'll flip it over and do the other side. We'll just get that cleaned up. Okay, so I'll record this. We'll put the new shims on there. We'll tap a bearing on, flip it over, and go after the other side the same way. So let me get that done, and I'll be right back with you. Okay guys, we're just changing bearings here, and we know that we took these shims out. It didn't come to us in a basket or anything, so we know these shims belong here. And you know, 9 times out of 10 you can get by with taking the original shims and putting them back in. When you're setting up used gears, you don't necessarily want to change too much. If the backlash was on the high side, don't try and tighten it up. The gears have been running like that for a long time, and what you want to do is kind of match the pattern that came out of there. So you don't want to change too much. If you're setting up new gears, or if you're you know, you had an explosion, you got to replace the carrier, something went wrong for you, well, that's a different story. Then you want to set them up right on the money. And having the shims under the bearing, when you have to make adjustments and you're just setting up and you don't know where you need to be, you don't know how thick your shim pack is, you know, say you got a new carrier or something, it's kind of tricky. You know, you could put your bearing on and then measure side to side and get pretty close that way. But it is a nuisance having them on the inside. A lot of vehicles, you know, you put them on the outside. You put your bearing, your cup, and you'd slip shims on the outside. It's a lot easier to do. What I do in a situation like that is I'll put my shims under there. And what I have here is a brand new bearing. Make sure you use a new bearing. Don't take your old one and use it. And you're going to kind of grind the ID out of there a little bit. Okay, so what you're going to have is you're not going to have a tight bearing like this that you got to bang on every time. What you want is a nice slip fit like that. Just like that. So you can put your shims in there, try it, check your backlash, check your tooth pattern. If you don't like it, you pull it out and that comes right off by hand. You don't want any slop in there. You want to grind that just perfect. You know, take it to a grinding shop or something, or do it very carefully. It's very hard, so it's kind of hard to do it on a lathe or something. You got to grind it out of there. My buddy Mike did these for me a long time ago, and I've got setup bearings for a lot of different rear ends. Makes it super easy. You know, you just put it on there. You don't got to get your puller out every single time you want to change shims and this and that. It's worth investing in a set of bearings to just ruin. You'll always have them as setup bearings. And that's the way I do it. In this instance, we don't really need to do that. Like I say, we're just changing bearings, so it's not a big deal. But if we weren't, these come in super handy. You know, you put your shims, and it's just that simple to take a bearing on and off. So just a little tip for you, so you don't drive yourself crazy. Carrier bearings can be a little bit of a bear, and when you got to change them a lot, any little advantage you can get is helpful. So just a little tip for you. I'll get the bearing on there, and we'll get the carrier ready to go in the case. Okay, we've got our bearings on, and now's a good time to check your spider gears. You just get some feeler gauges in there, make sure you don't have too much play. Specs are all in the service manual. These are in very nice shape. No wear at all on those. And if you're putting a locker in or anything, and you take these bolts out, because to put a locker in these, you gotta take the ring gear out and everything to get your locker in. To, you know, you've got to get your you can see, you got to get your pin out to get your locker in there. So anybody doing a locker, a lock right, anything like that, you've got to pull your ring gear. I like to mark it and put it back in the same place on the carrier. You don't have to, but I like to put it back in the same place. Always want to use new bolts. And when I do a carrier, or whenever I take these bolts out, I usually don't put these straps back in. These are very soft steel, and yeah, you do bend them up and it keeps the bolt from coming out, but with modern Loctites and things like that, and a modern bolt, you put your modern bolt in there right up against the carrier and get rid of that. That's just soft, and that can squeeze out over time. When they're in there and everything's fine, it looks good, I leave them in there. If I replace them, get a very high quality bolt for that, and a little bit of Loctite, put your ring gear on like that, and you don't need these. These are just a piece of very soft steel, and with a modern bolt you can just kind of squish that out of there. That's not what you want. But we don't need to touch any of that here. It's all in good shape. Spider gears are in good shape. So we're ready to put this in the case. We cleaned it down a little bit, and I'll get the cups on here. We'll go tap it in the case, see what the backlash looks like, and we'll check a pattern on it. Okay, I'm going to try and get you in there with the camera so you can see how this goes in. You want to start these kind of even and keep your cups tilted out a little bit. And it seems a little barbaric, but you're just going to tap it into place. Make sure everything's going in right. We got a nice dead blow hammer here, and nice and even take it in. Couple hits there, couple hits there. Okay, that's just about in. Now we're going to get our caps. We're going to torque those down. We're going to check the backlash and see how we did. Okay, if you remember, we marked these. I've got 2 dots there and 1 dot there. So we know exactly how these go back on. And remember, these have to go on the same way. These were bolted down, and then the housing was machined with these bolted down. So they've got to be where they came, same way. Everything has to be just like they came out. So these get torqued down to 50 foot-pounds. Take them down nice and even. Take these bolts down. A little bit here, a little bit here. Take them down nice and even. Draw the carrier down in there exactly where it wants to sit, and just go nice and easy. Don't just put all the torque on one bolt and then come the other way. You can crack these. Just nice and easy. Torque them down in a crisscross pattern when you do your final torque, and you'll be fine. Again, 50 foot-pounds, and that's where you leave it. Okay guys, we're finally getting down to checking the backlash. I had it in there the first time, and I checked the backlash. We had 1/1000 for backlash. No good. I pulled it out, and I pulled the bearings off again, and what we needed to do basically was get the ring gear to move away this way from the pinion to give us a little backlash. So when you move a shim from one side to the other, if you move 5,000 shim, you gain about 3,000 backlash. So I moved a full 10,000, and I picked up just about 7,000. Now when I measured this backlash before, when I first took this apart, it was 10 and a half, 11,000 depending on where you measured it, and I thought that was too much. So I thought we could snug it up just a little bit, because that was out of spec. And you know, with this thing in and out, the best I could get is 9,000, and I think that's going to be okay. When I pull these bearings off, they're made in Germany, and they actually measure just a tiny bit different than the ones that came out of there. Those 1,000ths on one and about 0.5 on the other one. So I think that had something to do with it. I'm not sure. But what I did was I moved a 10,000 shim from the bolt side to the tooth side, basically, and shoved over the whole carrier. And I'll show you the backlash now. It's just about 9,000. I think you can see that. I hope you can see that okay. Just about 9,000. The spec is 6 to 10. On new gears, I like to keep them real tight. On old gears, I don't mind going a little bit bigger. This was pretty generous at 10, 10 and a half, 11,000 backlash when I took it apart, so I don't mind settling in at 9. We're going to put some marking compound on the gears now, and run a tooth pattern and see what that looks like next. But it's in there. Everything's torqued down. Right now we're looking at 9,000 backlash. Hopefully our pattern will come out pretty nice. So let me get set up for that. Let me get the camera adjusted so you can see in there. And I'll have to probably set you up on the other side to see the tooth smear. So let me get set up for that. Okay, I've got a little marking compound. We'll put it on both sides, the drive and the coast side. And then we'll run it, and we'll see what it looks like. We've got a pretty distinct pattern on the teeth already, and we don't want to be too far off of that. Like I say, if it was new gears, we could set them up however we want, as long as they're centered in the tooth there. you know, we could tighten up on the backlash and we could do this and that on a new set. But on a used set, we want to try and match what's there. So we're just going to make sure we're not way out of whack here. And this isn't the greatest marking compound I've got. I've got some nice thick yellow stuff, but I can't find it for the life of me, so I got this white stuff. Okay, now we're going to run this both ways, and we'll get an impression of the teeth there and see where we're at. Okay, we'll come back. Okay, let me make sure you can see this. Okay, let me take you through that. Okay, now we're trying to match the wear pattern that we had on there, and let me see if I can get you in there. Now, this side of the tooth, let me see if you can see me. Where am I? Okay, this inside part of the tooth right here, that's your coast side, and this side here, the back side where my pick is now, that's the drive side. So our coast side, we've got a pattern up in this area. Yeah, you can't see that. Okay, we've got our pattern up on this part of the tooth, and our drive side, we're centered nice, and we're on the lower part of the tooth. I'll try and draw that for you a little bit. I know it's hard to see in there, but you want to get your pattern right. So let me get out of here a little bit. Okay, if this is our tooth, and this part right here, this part of the tooth was the coast, and this is drive down here, what we've got is we've got our drive, our coast up in this area here. Okay, and that's alright. And our drive, it's centered pretty nice, and it's down in this area here. And what you want to do, this is the high point of the tooth right here. You want this centered, you know, from bottom to top, which it is, and you want this centered from top to bottom here, which it also is. And we matched up perfectly with the old wear pattern we had there. If you start getting way down here and way down here, that's no good. And if it's all bunched up in the middle, then your pinion's too deep. If your pinion's too shallow, it's just going to hit down the bottom here. But when you're centered with your pattern in the tooth, that's what you're looking for. I know it's kind of hard to see here. I was trying to get a better shot, but it's kind of tricky to see. Let's see if you could see in there. Okay, on our coast side, on this one, you see how it's kind of centered on the tooth? It's centered from the bottom to the top there, and that's what we want. That's how the original was. And then the drive side, yeah, it's hard to show the drive side, but that's also centered from top to bottom. And as long as it's centered, you know, it's not too crazy where it's hitting. If it's hitting a little low, in the middle, a little high, it's not terrible. You want that pinion and ring gear relationship to be in the right spot. And by the smoothness and the wear on these teeth already, you could see everything was centered perfectly, and we hit that again, and we've got 9 thousandths backlash, and everything is working out just fine. So it's kind of tricky. If anybody's doing a rear end and you're getting kind of screwed up on it or anything, just send me a comment and let me know what's happening, and try and get you through it. But we do have a nice pattern, and let's go over to the bench now and see what everything looks like. Okay, everybody, let's take a look and see where we've been on this rear axle. It was a little bit of a pain, but we got it set up now. We put our original pinion depth shims in, and they were 25 thousandths. Pinion was marked +2. Normally a pinion is set, you know, I've probably done 500 of these things. I usually find pinions set anywhere from 25 to 30, so this one fell right in. If the pinion was 0, it would have been 27. So I feel real good about that. Our preload was a little crazy. We started with 55 thousandths shim pack. We put those new bearings in there, and you know, we had some bearings made outside the USA that Vin got for me. So still high quality bearings, but a couple of them were just a hair oversized. And I don't know if that made a difference in anything, but the preload went the opposite way. We started at 55 thousandths shim pack. We wound up at 81. And we needed 81 to get our 19 inch-pounds of rotational torque. So that worked out pretty good. I feel real good about that. Our carrier shims, I was not expecting this. On the bolt side of the ring gear, it was 45 originally, and the two side had 27. That's quite a bit difference between them. I usually don't see that much difference. And what I wound up doing, I eventually settled on 35 on the bolt side and 37 on the two side. That gave me 9 thousandths of backlash, and I feel good about that because the tooth pattern worked out real nice. So if it was any tighter on the backlash, I don't think I'd get as nice a tooth pattern. I'm going to try and show you that. I made a little better picture here. Okay, here's our tooth, and the heel is the outside. That's the side, you know, the side closest to you when you're looking at it, and the toe is the inside. The curved section there, that's the coast side, and your drive side is the straight section. And this is what we got for, I know it was hard to see, I couldn't get you in there, and they didn't have the real good marking compound anyway. That would have made a lot crisper pattern that you could see. But what you want is you want your tooth, by setting the pinion correctly, you want your tooth to hit centered in the surface there. You know, you want a little space top and bottom. And on our drive, we're down here, so we're centered real nice, and our coast, we're up on the other side and we're centered real nice. Very happy with the pattern. It matches what was there. Everything's good. Let me show you if you could see. Okay, on this page here, these are good patterns here. And basically we fall under this pattern here. We got our drive down low toward the toe, and we got our coast on the heel, and it's set up real nice. But what you can see on all these is that the wear pattern is centered in the tooth. And that's what you want. You want your wear pattern in the tooth. If you set your pinion right, and your tooth is centered in there, everything should work out alright. You could come up with a bunch of different patterns and it's all going to work out. If your pinion's too shallow, like on this page, you can see you're going to start hitting way up top, and you don't want that. If your pinion's too deep, like on this page, you're going to be way down low, and that's not good either. It won't be too long before you start hearing noise and everything goes to hell. But we've got a real good pattern. Again, we're like this pattern here. We're centered. On the drive side, we're down low toward the toe, and on the coast side, we're toward the heel. Perfect. So that's roughly what we look like in there. And I'm happy with that. The rear end set up very nice. I hope the front end sets up pretty good too. I think we'll end the video there. I don't want to make them too long. I know some guys don't like them when they're too long, but I don't have the brake kits yet, and I really wanted to wrap up the axle shaft installation and the brakes at one time, so I don't have those yet, so that's a little bit of a problem. But we'll move on to the front end, and there's a lot to talk about on the front end because we got to get those knuckles just right, and we got to get the wheel bearings in there and stuff like that, and we've got to put our studs in all the hubs and stuff. That's how that's going to sit in there, and then we're going to press all our studs in these holes. We're going to use our jig again. It's good for getting them out, but it's also good for putting them in. And you see how nice and flat that sits. We can just drive them in, and we'll get that done. And we'll talk about the knuckles next time, and we'll get going on the front end ring and pinion setup, and hopefully the brakes will show up one of these days. So that's where we're going to end it. And like I say, it was kind of crazy seeing the tooth pattern, but if anybody's got any questions, feel free to send me a comment. If you like the videos, hit the like button or subscribe. And like I say, we're trying to make the channel better all the time. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. And I appreciate you watching. And we'll see you next time.